You better start earning your keep. That was the first thing my stepdad screamed at me while I lay in a hospital bed fresh from emergency surgery. My body still numb, my legs barely moving. I told him I couldn't work yet. Doctor's orders. 2 weeks. Then his hand came down. The world tipped. Cold tiles kissed my cheek. Blood flooded my mouth. My hands trembled as he snarled, "Stop pretending you're weak." When police rushed in, everyone stared at him in horror. What they didn't know was that this wasn't the worst thing he'd done. The real betrayal had started long before that slap. My name is Emma. I'm in my late 20s, and before that hospital bed became the center of my world, I worked retail during the day and took on creative freelance projects at night. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid some of the bills. More importantly, it kept the lights on in the house my dad left us. My real dad died after a long illness. The kind that drains savings quietly invoice by invoice until you're too tired to argue with the numbers anymore. After the funeral, the house felt hollow. His jacket still hung by the door. His coffee mug sat untouched in the sink. My mom tried to stay strong, but I could see how the weight bent her shoulders a little more each month. That was when my stepdad entered our lives. He showed up polite, helpful, confident. The kind of man who spoke in solutions instead of sympathy. He said he could help organize the payments, said he'd take care of things so my mom could finally rest. 6 months later, they were married. I remember standing in the living room afterward, watching him carry boxes into the house like he'd always belonged there. At first, nothing felt wrong. Then small things started to shift. Bills stopped coming to the kitchen table. Payments were handled. My mom stopped checking accounts because she didn't need to anymore. When I asked questions, I was told not to worry. When I pushed, I was reminded how lucky we were to have someone willing to take charge. Mom started getting tired, then forgetful. She'd lose her train of thought mid-sentence, stare at the stove like she couldn't remember why it was on. My stepdad brushed it off as stress. He handed her vitamins every morning lined up neatly on the counter and watched until she swallowed them. I kept working. I paid rent to stay in my childhood bedroom. I told myself this was adulthood, compromise, family. Then my appendix ruptured. The pain came fast and violent, folding me in half on the bathroom floor. Surgery followed. When I woke up, my body felt like it had been rearranged without my consent. The doctor told me I needed time. 2 weeks. No lifting, no work. That's what I told my stepdad from the hospital bed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just explained. I can't work yet. He looked at me like I'd insulted him. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything shifted. The moment I stopped being family to him and became a problem. And once I became a problem, he stopped pretending otherwise. The hospital room was too bright for that early in the morning. White walls, white sheets, a steady electronic hum that made time feel thick and slow. I remember staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the cracks to distract myself from the pain pulling at my side every time I breathed. That was when he walked in. No greeting, no concern, just the sharp sound of the door closing behind him and his reflection in the metal cabinet across from my bed. His jaw was tight, his shoulders squared, the kind of posture people use when they've already decided they're right. He started talking about money before he even reached the bed. Bills, payments, how things were backing up, how I needed to pull my weight. I tried to keep my voice steady when I answered. I told him the doctor said I couldn't work yet. 2 weeks, maybe less if healing went well. He laughed, not loud, just enough to sting. That's when he said it. That line that still echoes in my head sometimes when the house is too quiet. You better start earning your keep. I remember blinking, convinced I'd misheard him. I was hooked to monitors. My IV bag dripped steadily beside me. I hadn't even stood up on my own yet. I repeated myself. Softer this time. I told him I physically couldn't. His face changed. It wasn't explosive anger. It was colder than that. Controlled. Like something inside him finally clicked into place. He leaned closer, lowered his voice, and said I was pretending. Said I was dramatic. Said I was weak. Then his hand hit my face. I didn't see it coming. 1 second I was lying back against the pillow, the next I was sliding sideways, tangled in sheets, crashing down onto the floor. The impact knocked the air out of me. Cold tiles pressed against my cheek. I tasted metal and realized my lip was bleeding. My hands shook as I tried to push myself up. Not from fear, from shock. He stood over me and barked, "Stop pretending you're weak." That was when the room filled with noise. Footsteps, voices, someone shouting for security, nurses rushing in, eyes wide, hands already reaching for me. I remember one of them kneeling down, telling me not to move, her voice tight with anger she was trying to hide. And then the police arrived. They took one look at me on the floor, at the blood on my hospital gown, at the IV stand tipped over beside the bed, and everything changed. My stepdad started talking fast, explaining, smiling in that thin, slippery way he used when things didn't go his way. I lay there listening, staring at the fluorescent lights, and felt something inside me harden. That slap wasn't a loss of control, it was a declaration. And for the first time, I understood exactly who he was. I was discharged a day later than planned, not because my incision had reopened, but because everyone suddenly moved slower around me, like they were afraid I might shatter if they breathed too hard. A nurse slipped a folded card into my paperwork while my stepdad argued with the front desk about parking validation. She didn't say a word, she just met my eyes and gave the smallest nod. I didn't look at the card until that night. Home felt different when we got back. Quieter, smaller. My mom hovered like she was afraid to touch me, her hands always half raised then dropping again. She forgot where she put her glasses, forgot what day it was. She apologized for everything, for the noise, for the light, for existing. He acted like nothing had happened. He cooked dinner, he joked, he told a story about traffic and laughed at his own punchline. When my mom took too long to answer a question, he finished her sentences for her. When she winced, he handed her the same vitamins he always did lined up on the counter like little soldiers. I watched. Pain meds blurred the edges of the days, but they sharpened something else. Patterns, timing, the way my mom's confusion spiked after certain meals, the way paperwork vanished the moment I asked about it, payments I knew I'd made that somehow didn't exist anymore. The card the nurse gave me had a website on it. I waited until everyone was asleep. I read until my eyes burned. Financial control, medical manipulation, isolation. The words felt uncomfortably familiar, like reading a list someone had made just for us. A few days later, our neighbor knocked on the door with soup. She stood in the kitchen and watched my mom shuffle past, then leaned in and whispered that something wasn't right. Her daughter worked in healthcare. She'd noticed the bottles, the dosages, the way my mom had changed. That night I went into the room he kept locked. The lock was cheap. The room wasn't. Folders stacked neatly, papers labeled with words like insurance and benefits. I didn't read everything. I didn't need to. One page was enough, then another, then another. Policies in my mom's name. Big numbers, dates that lined up too perfectly with her decline. My hands shook, but my mind was suddenly very clear. This wasn't chaos. It was planning. I put everything back exactly where it was. I went to bed and stared at the ceiling until morning. Fear pressed heavy on my chest, but underneath it was something else. Focus. I stopped confronting him. I stopped asking questions. I let him think I was still broken. And while he relaxed, convinced he'd won, I started quietly preparing to end this. Once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. I replayed everything in my head like security footage on a loop. The timing of my mom's bad days, the way her hands shook more after breakfast than dinner, the way he hovered when she took those vitamins, watching until she swallowed like it mattered more than anything else in the room. I stopped thinking of it as my life and started thinking of it like a case. Distance gave me clarity. The first thing I did was stop reacting. I didn't argue when he talked over my mom. I didn't flinch when he snapped. I nodded. I stayed quiet. I moved slowly, like I was still fragile. He liked that version of me. He mistook silence for surrender. Behind his back, I started connecting dots. I searched names late at night, old addresses, public records. It didn't take long to find the first woman, then another, different states, same pattern, fast relationships, shared finances, sudden illnesses, ugly separations. I sent one careful message. No accusations, just a question. Her reply came an hour later. You too. That was the moment I knew I wasn't imagining any of this. We talked for hours, then she added me to a small group. Women who had all lived some version of my life. They didn't speak with drama or anger, just facts. Dates, documents, behaviors so similar it made my stomach turn. One of them worked in legal support. Another kept everything, every payment, every email. They didn't tell me what to do. They just told me I wasn't alone. The next piece came from closer to home. Our neighbor's daughter stopped by one afternoon under the excuse of checking on my mom. She watched quietly as my stepdad poured a smoothie and mixed in powder from an unmarked container. Later, when we were alone, she told me she couldn't diagnose anything without testing, but she didn't like what she was seeing. The combinations, the amounts, the symptoms. It explains a lot, she said softly. That was enough. I started documenting. Conversations, schedules, the way he prepared meals, the way he insisted on handling anything financial. I didn't touch his things again. I didn't need to. He was careless now, confident. He talked openly on the phone, assuming no one was listening. Then he made his move. He came home one evening with a folder tucked under his arm, smiling like a man who thought he'd already won. He said it was just paperwork, said the lawyer recommended it since my mom had been confused lately. Power of attorney, temporary, just in case. My mom's hand shook when she reached for the pen. I felt something snap inside me, but I kept my voice steady. I asked a simple question. Shouldn't we have someone there for something this important? Just to make sure it's done right? He hesitated, just for a second. Then he agreed. He said we'd schedule it for the following week. That week was everything. The women I'd connected with helped me understand what mattered, what held weight, what crossed lines. I spoke to professionals quietly, carefully. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't plead. I just told the truth and showed what I had. They listened. The plan came together fast after that. He announced he'd be out late one night for his community league, something he never missed. He left the house relaxed, joking, already counting future money that wasn't his yet. He kissed my mom on the forehead before he walked out. I watched him go and felt nothing but resolve. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang, then again. Then the house filled with people, calm voices, badges, gentle hands guiding my mom into a coat, a medical team asking questions she finally answered clearly, boxes brought in for documents, devices collected, everything done by the book, no shouting, no chaos. Across town at the same time, someone tapped my stepdad on the shoulder. I wasn't there, but I heard about it later, how he laughed at first, how he tried to explain, how his confidence drained as quickly as it had filled, how the room went silent when they cuffed him, how the people he'd been boasting to just hours earlier stepped back suddenly unsure they'd ever known him at all. When he was brought back to the house, it was already over. He saw my mom sitting safely on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, answering questions with clarity I hadn't seen in months. He saw strangers carrying out boxes from his office. He saw me standing near the doorway, calm, steady, no fear left to hide. For the first time, he looked small. He tried to talk to me, to explain, to bargain. He said I'd misunderstood everything, said he'd been trying to help, said families handle things privately. I didn't raise my voice. I told him the truth didn't need protecting. As they led him away, he turned once more, eyes sharp with something close to panic. The man who once yelled at me in a hospital bed couldn't find a single word that mattered. The aftermath moved quickly. Testing confirmed what we suspected. Financial reviews uncovered things I hadn't even known to look for. More people came forward, stories stacked on stories until there was no room left for denial. Every attempt he made to control the narrative collapsed under the weight of facts. My mom stayed in care for observation. Within days, her mind cleared. Color returned to her face. She cried when she realized what had been happening, then cried harder when she realized it was over. The house felt different without him. Not louder, not emptier, just lighter. Neighbors stopped by. Friends we hadn't seen in years called. Women I'd never met thanked me for speaking up because it helped them do the same. The man who once claimed ownership over our lives disappeared into a system built to handle exactly people like him. And standing in the quiet living room one evening, surrounded by boxes of evidence and the soft sound of my mom breathing evenly in the next room, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. Not because he was gone, but because I finally understood my power. The change in my mom didn't happen overnight, but it was unmistakable. Within days of being away from him, the fog lifted. She slept through the night. She finished sentences without drifting off. The constant apology in her voice faded, replaced by something steadier, something like herself. Professionals explained what had been happening in careful, measured language. They talked about interactions, long-term effects, how control can wear a person down without leaving obvious marks. My mom listened quiet and focused, then reached for my hand like she used to when I was a kid. That small gesture felt like getting her back. The house became ours again. Windows opened, drawers stayed where we left them. Bills were spread out on the table, no longer hidden, no longer mysterious. It was overwhelming, but it was honest. The legal side moved forward without drama. Facts did most of the talking. Others stepped forward, their stories echoing ours in ways that made my chest ache. Accountability followed, not loudly, not theatrically, but firmly. I went back to work slowly. Different hours, different priorities. I started volunteering then, training, helping people recognize the signs we'd missed for so long. Not because I was fearless, but because I knew how silence feels. One evening, my mom hung a new photo in the hallway. Just the two of us. No explanations, no shadows. For the first time in years, the future felt quiet in the best way. I'm telling you this because family betrayal doesn't always look loud at first. Sometimes it looks like help. Sometimes it sounds like control wrapped in concern. And sometimes it takes one moment of clarity to change everything. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone. And it's not too late to draw a line. If you've ever had to protect yourself or someone you love from the people closest to you, share your story in the comments. And hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story.